10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 99. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 99 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. My name is Nick Manella. We made it all the way to episode 99. Next one will be our 100th episode. Very, very excited about that. We're going to try to do something really special for that one. Thanks for tuning in. If you're new to the show, you can find all of the PDFs for all the exercises that we're talking about in these episodes at our Patreon site. It's patreon.com/10-minute jazz lesson, and you could get everything all the way from episode 1 back there. So there is a ton of material on that site, and it's a very, very low cost every month, only $3 a month. So help us out, go over and become a patron of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast and get over 100 PDFs in return for that small donation. We wanted to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. As always, Rejuvenate is nice enough to sponsor these podcasts. And if you're a reed player and you haven't checked out Rejuvenate yet, you are really, really missing out. If you're like me and you get easily frustrated with your reeds, these guys are going to be a godsend for you. They've developed a brand new system for storing your reeds, and I mean, they are ready to play as soon as you take them out of the case. And mine last on average a couple of weeks longer than they would in a regular reed case. And that's just due to the revolutionary new system that they have developed for storing those reeds. So make sure you go and check them out if you're a reed player. Head on over to rejuvenate.com, or you can go onto our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and you can click on the link and go over and check them out. All right, let's jump into the podcast for today. So this is a part 3. We don't typically do 3-part series, but I think this one is aptly named. It's called the Never-Ending Exercise, so it would only make sense that we do a 3-part series on this and really show you that it is truly never-ending. So just a quick recap. I know that you've probably listened to the past 2 episodes, but what this is an exercise where we're playing triads or chords in fourths, right around the circle of fourths, and turning it into an exercise that ends up being very, very melodic due to that circle of fourths and how compositional the circle of fourths is and how much of jazz is centered around that circle of fourths. This makes it a really, really great exercise to get some of these patterns under your fingers because they transfer to tunes very, very easily. So we've talked about triads, we've talked about major triads, and we've talked about how we can connect them using chromaticism, using inversions, and eventually kind of doing it randomly to develop some of that creativity that we all want to have in our playing. This is a great exercise. Typically, the word exercise and creativity don't go that well together, but in this one, I truly believe that you can kind of unleash your creative potential on this particular exercise. And what we're going to talk about today is going from triads to actually doing this same exercise with 7th chords. And this really opens up a lot of possibilities as soon as we add that 7th. So let me say at first that this is going to actually obscure the tonality just a tiny little bit. A triad has such a magnetic pull to the key that you're in. It's the easiest way to outline a tonality is by playing its triad. So as soon as you add a 7th to these chords, you muddle that tonality just a little bit. Not much. I mean, it's still going to be pretty clear what key we're in, but it is going to become a little bit less black and white as to what key we're in. So as we start going through these exercises and we get more advanced, this actually makes sense. We go from the clearest set of tonality to a little bit more muddled of a sound, but still extremely, extremely useful in my opinion. So what we're going to be dealing with as our first seventh chord in this exercise is the major seventh chord. And the reason that I chose this is that between the major seventh and the root is a half step, obviously, right? So we're starting to introduce some half steps into these exercises, and you're going to see that this really, really opens up the possibilities, and it really opens up the tonal palette when we can start to include chords in inversions that contain a half step in the middle of them. Usually when we're playing chords or triads, we're used to nothing narrower than the interval of a third, right? That's usually where we're at when we're practicing our chord tones, we're practicing our triads, we're practicing our chords. But as soon as you invert a seventh chord, you get this really cool melodicism because you get a half step. Now, if you were going to use a dominant seventh chord or a minor seventh chord, you would actually get a whole step in between the seventh and the root. So this really has no boundaries to it. And I highly suggest that. That's why it's called the never-ending exercise. Do this in major. Do it in over dominant chords. Do it over minor seventh chords. Do it over diminished chords. Do it over anything you can possibly think of, and it will really become that never-ending exercise that we're talking about. I mean, this is years of work here, but this is work that's going to be really time well spent when it comes to developing that flexibility in every key and with every chord quality. So let's jump into the first exercise. This one's really, really simple. All we're doing is major seventh chords from the root. So if you look at your PDF, this is going to be the first exercise on the PDF for this week. And it is literally just root position, major seventh chords going around the circle of fourths. Let's check out what that sounds like before we get into anything more complicated. So you can hear that that major seventh does kind of take away from the magnetic pull of a triad, but we deal with major seventh chords all the time in jazz, so we gotta practice it. It's not like we could get by with just playing triads, unfortunately. You can do so much with just triads, but we do have to study our seventh chords, which is where this exercise comes in really, really handy. So let's look at the next exercise, and this is where that half step between the seventh and the root is really going to start to make its presence known. What we're going to do is we're just going to invert the major seventh chord so that we're starting on the third. But when we do this, now we do have that half step. We could go up to the 9, but we're not going to do that right now. We're going to incorporate that half step into our lines so that if you're starting on a C major chord, you're going to play E, G, B natural, C, getting that half step between the B and the C before moving on to the next chord. So this is going around the circle of fourths, but inverted major seventh chords starting on the third. That's what this one sounds like. So it almost sounds like a completely different exercise. It's in fact exactly the same thing, just starting on the third. But the presence of that half step really, really changes the sound of what you're doing. And again, we're not looking at these exercises while we're playing them. It's fine to look at them at first, but you quickly want to start to play them from memory after you know what's going on. Not really going to benefit you if you have to read it off the page, right? So this is going to be a tricky one for you as soon as you stop looking at the page. Now for the third exercise, I've chosen to do something completely different that really will show you the depth of these and what you can do. So what we're doing with exercise number 3, we're sticking with the major seventh chords, But what we're going to do is we're playing 1, 3, then we're jumping all the way up to the 7th, and then up to the 9. So we're omitting the 5th, and in its place, we're going to use the 9th. Now, this does a couple of things. The 5th doesn't really have any impact on tonality, right? It's not telling us whether it's major or minor. It's not telling us what kind of 7th chord we're playing. It is kind of just, I don't want to say an inconsequential note. Let's call it a static note. Because until we get into half diminished and diminished chords, the 5th is not really telling us anything about the chord, except for that it has a regular 5th. Right? Whereas the 3rd is telling us whether it's major or minor, and the 7th is telling us what kind of 7th chord we're playing. All right. So this is going to do that, where we're going to remove the 5th and we're going to start learning about the 9th. But what it's also going to do is it's going to give us this big interval in the middle of the exercise. It's actually going to give us a 5th in the middle of the exercise. So it's opening up our ears to wider intervals. It's getting us to practice wider intervals on our instrument. And it's just a completely different way of playing a chord, where sometimes we get accustomed to just playing 1, 3, 5, 7 on everything. And then maybe we add the 9 on top. Let's take the 5th out and add the 9. Let's see what that does to our brain, what that does to our playing skills. So here's what exercise number 3 sounds like. So you would not believe how much that can open up your technique and open up your ears to hearing some wider intervals, which is a huge thing that we all want to do, is have a handle on all of our intervals, not just the really narrow intervals that we use in a scale or when we're playing thirds or something like that. This is a great way to work on intervals. And you could come up with a whole bunch of different ways to practice this. What if you just took 7, 9, and sharp 11, right? And you started practicing those. There's so many combinations, it boggles the mind. Again, the never-ending exercise, right? So let's talk about how you can make it more never-ending. That doesn't really sound right, but let's talk about it anyways. So you could take this and you could apply it to dominant 7th chords, minor 7th chords, minor major 7th chords, half diminished chords, diminished chords, altered chords, any extension you could think of. Really anything. I mean, there's so many different ways to do this. Now, here, this will really blow your mind. What if for every one of these exercises that you practiced on your instrument, you also required yourself to be able to sing through it? I mean, how crazy would that be, right? You would really, really develop very, very quickly as a musician if you started to do a lot of this stuff. So it's almost too much to even think about, but just get started. Take a bite out of that never-ending exercise and come up with some different ways to play it. And then the whole world of possibilities is going to eventually be opened up to you once you get going down this path. It becomes almost like addictive. You need to figure out that next step. You need to figure out that next derivation of this exercise. It's such a great thing. I just highly, highly recommend it. Okay, so that's going to about do it for this week. Get in touch, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought about this episode. We've got a lot of great people over at Patreon donating their hard-earned money every week to keep this podcast going, and we really, really appreciate that, and we would like to have some more supporters. I mean, think about it. Over this past 3 episodes, we've literally given a lifetime of stuff that you can work on. It would be great if you could show your support. If you're somebody that listens to this podcast on a regular basis, it's only $36 a year to support us, $3 a month. It would be so great. We would just really, really appreciate it. So head on over to Patreon, join those other fantastic listeners that are pledging their support for the show, showing us that they want us to keep going. And we've got some big things in store as soon as we get some donations that are going to make it possible, like having some very, very amazing people guest host some of these podcasts. we need some of those funds to be able to pay them the money that they deserve to drop some serious knowledge on us. So head over to Patreon, pledge your $3 a month, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right, we will see you on Monday with a brand new episode, and we'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.